You can stand on the frozen roof of the world, or in the red poison of a land that died screaming, or at the bottom of a buried city with a false sky stretched over it, and the same golden tree will be sitting on the horizon, exactly as large as it was the last time you looked, and you can never once walk up to it. In a world that lets you climb almost everything it builds, ride into almost every ruin, and fall into almost every hole in the ground, the single structure that the entire religion is named after is the one place the map quietly refuses to let you reach out and touch. Beneath it, rooted into its underside, and still slowly growing, is the body of a murdered prince who has been dead since before your story started, and nobody in the Golden City above him will say his name out loud. Tonight, we are going to look directly at the tree instead of at the family who lived underneath it. How tall it would actually have to be. What is holding it up, down in the dark where almost nobody looks? Why there are dozens of smaller copies of it standing across the world, each one full grown, each one apparently arriving overnight. Why the light it gives off reaches some places and refuses others. What is actually inside it, at the center behind a door that will not open for anyone. And why, when it finally burns at the end of everything, the fire behaves like nothing you or I would recognize as fire at all. This is a long, slow walk through a very old question, and you do not need to hold on to any of it. If you drift off somewhere in the roots, that is exactly what this was built for. Chapter 1: The Light That Reaches Too Far. Distance does the same thing to every object in this world, without exception. The further away a thing sits, the smaller it appears, until eventually it drops below the curve of the horizon or dissolves into haze, and you lose it entirely. That is how the lands between treats every castle you will ever ride toward, every ruin you will ever clear, every mountain range that ever sat between you and somewhere you were trying to get to. It is not how the lands between treats the Erdtree, ride to the far northern edge of the map, up into the mountaintops of the giants, where the cold is so total that an entire ancient war appears to have frozen in place rather than ever finish. Turn and look south. The golden crown is still there, not a suggestion of it, not a glow on the horizon that you have to squint at and convince yourself about. It is unmistakable, it has structure, and it is warm enough that the snow around your feet carries a faint gold cast that has no other possible source. Now ride the other way. Go down into Kaled, a region so thoroughly poisoned that it has its own color, its own weather, and its own permanent scar across every map anyone has ever drawn of this place. Stand in the middle of that red waste, among things that should not be alive and are, and look up. It is still there, still gold, still gleaming, still hanging above a landscape it evidently could not be troubled to save. Do it again from the Weeping Peninsula in the far south. Do it from the Altus Plateau, from the shore of Lurnia, from the roof of a ruin in Limgrave on your very first evening in this world. The tree is there from all of them, and here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. It is not meaningfully smaller from any of them. It does not shrink the way distant things are supposed to shrink. It occupies roughly the same portion of the sky from positions that are, by any reading of the map, enormous distances apart. It is worth sitting with how strange that is, because it quietly rules out the easy answer before you have finished considering it. A very tall tree, given enough real distance, still eventually falls below the curve of the world. Mountains do this, towers do this, everything does this. The Erdtree does not. It stays visible, stays bright, and stays close to the same apparent size from positions that ought to have swallowed it entirely. There are two honest ways to read that, and both deserve naming rather than pretending only one survives contact with scrutiny. The generous reading is that it is artistic license, a deliberate design choice to keep the player oriented toward the story's center no matter how far they wander, useful navigational information dressed up in gold. That is a perfectly reasonable thing for a game to do, and many games do it. The stranger reading, and the one this world's own writing keeps quietly supporting the longer you spend with it, is that this is a genuine property of the thing itself. That light behaves differently here because the object producing it is not obeying the same rules as the rock and the water and the sky around it. That what you are seeing from the frozen peaks is not a very large object at a very great distance, but something that is present to the whole world at once, in a way that ordinary distance does not get a say in. Hold that second reading loosely for now. It is going to keep coming back, and by the end of the night, it will have collected a great deal of company. If we take that visibility seriously, even for a moment, the arithmetic gets uncomfortable very quickly. Lindell, the royal capital, sits at the foot of the Erdtree, and Lindell is not a modest place. It is a full city, several districts deep, with a cathedral quarter, an avenue wide enough to march an army down, and a sewer system beneath it that is itself the size of a respectable dungeon in any other game. It has a skyline, it has scale of its own, and from the ground inside that city, the trunk of the Erdtree does not read as a tree trunk at all. It reads as a wall. It fills the sky the way a cliff face fills the sky, with no visible curvature and no sense whatsoever that you are looking at something round, because you are standing far too close to a curve far too large to perceive. The same thing happens if you stand at the base of a genuinely enormous dome in our world. The curve stops being a curve and becomes a plane, and your eye stops reporting a shape and just reports surface. Then you climb. You go up through the Capitol, up onto the rooftops, up the great stairs, out along the walkways, and the tree does not resolve into a shape the way a building would. It simply continues. The canopy above you is not a canopy in any sense a person could sketch on paper. It is a ceiling of gold that runs off in every direction, past the point where your eye can follow it, past the point where perspective is any help at all. Now put that beside the visibility problem from the first chapter and let the two of them talk to each other. To remain that large on the horizon from the mountaintops of the giants, and also from Kaled, and also from the Weeping Peninsula, this object cannot merely be the tallest thing in the region. It has to be on a scale where the continent itself becomes a local detail. The map is not a country with a tree in it. The map is the ground immediately around the base of something considerably larger than the map. Some people run the numbers properly, using the visible landmarks for reference, and land somewhere in the tens of kilometers of height. Others argue, entirely reasonably, that the geometry of game worlds is always compressed, that a horse crosses a whole region in 4 minutes, and that measuring anything here in real units is a category error from the start. Both of those positions are defensible, and I am not going to pretend one of them wins cleanly. But notice what neither of them explains away. The tree is treated consistently by the writing and by the architecture and by the behavior of every single faction in the story as a thing of a different order entirely. Not the biggest object in the world, something that the world has been arranged around. Every road in Lindell points at it. Every religion in the story is defined by its relationship to it. Every war in the backstory is ultimately about who gets to stand next to it. That is not how anyone in any story has ever treated a tree, however large. That is how you treat a sun. Chapter 2: The trunk you cannot touch, and the shadow that is not there. Here is a detail that is easy to miss, precisely because it never announces itself, and once you have noticed it, you will not be able to stop noticing it. Across the entire game, through every region, past every optional cave and hidden grave and side path, you are never permitted to walk up to the Erdtree and put your hand on it. Think about how genuinely unusual that is in a world built almost entirely around going to look at things. You can walk into the mouth of a volcano and speak to the man living inside it. You can descend beneath a lake into a city that nobody was ever supposed to find. You can ride to the bottom of a chasm on the back of a spirit and stand under a sky that is not a sky, on grass that has never seen daylight. You can climb a dragon's back. You can walk the inside of a divine tower. The game is extraordinarily generous, with access almost everywhere you look, and yet the one landmark you can see from literally every corner of the map is the one landmark that stays permanently at arm's length. You get close twice, and neither time is really an approach. You reach the base of it in the capital, where it has stopped being a thing with a shape and become a wall of bark filling the horizon. And you reach it again at the very end, after the fire, when what is standing there is not the tree so much as the aftermath of the tree. In neither case do you get the thing a person actually wants, which is to stand far enough back to see it whole while still being near enough to understand that it is real. There is an argument that this is simply a technical limitation, and that argument carries some genuine weight. Rendering an object of that scale at close range with any fidelity is a hard problem. Games have been dodging that problem in exactly this way for decades, keeping the enormous thing on the skybox where it cannot be inspected. But the same game builds crumbling Farum Azula out of impossible floating masonry and lets you walk every inch of it. The same game builds a city under a mountain and lets you cross it on foot. The limitation cannot be the whole story, because this team has repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to let you go and stand inside the impossible thing. The more interesting reading is that the inaccessibility is doing narrative work. A thing that everyone can see and nobody can reach is not really a landmark at all. It is a deity. It is the object every religion in the world orients itself toward, and that none of the faithful ever get to lay hands on. The distance is not a rendering compromise. The distance is the relationship. And that reading gets considerably stronger later, when you finally do get inside and discover that the reason the door was closed was not modesty or mystery. It was that something was in there. There is a second thing this tree withholds, and it is stranger than distance, because it is something a body that size should not be able to withhold at all. Distance it can bend. What it does with light is harder to explain away, and unlike the trunk, you do not need to travel anywhere to notice it. You only need to stand in the capital at midday and ask why you are not in shadow. Consider light for a moment, and what light is obliged to do when there is that much of it. An object of that size, glowing that brightly, sitting at the center of a continent, ought to have enormous and completely unmissable consequences for everything around it. It should throw a shadow across entire regions. It should create a permanent noon on one side of the world and a permanent dusk on the other. It should scorch what sits closest to it and starve what sits furthest away. The presence of a second sun in the middle of a landmass is not a decorative fact. It is a climate. The world does contain versions of these effects, but they never behave the way physics would insist they behave. Lindell sits directly beneath the canopy and is not in permanent darkness. It is bathed in gold, lit from above by the very thing that ought to be blocking its sky. That is not how a canopy works. That is how a lamp works. The regions furthest from the tree are not frozen for want of light. The mountaintops are frozen, certainly, but the story treats that as historical rather than optical, the residue of a war and a curse rather than a consequence of distance from a light source. Caelid is not dark, it is red, and it is dying, and it can see the tree perfectly well the entire time it does so. What the tree emits, then, is not really light in the sense of illumination. It is something the world keeps describing in an entirely different vocabulary. Blessing, grace, favor, the golden order itself. It reaches where it is welcome. It withdraws where it is not. Caelid still sees the tree, but nothing about Kaled suggests the tree is doing anything for Kaled. This is where the Erdtree stops behaving like an astronomical object and starts behaving like a political one. Its light is not distributed by distance. It is distributed by consent, by allegiance, by who has been accepted and who has been quietly written out of the story. The omen sealed under the capital are not further from the tree than the nobles above them. They are directly underneath it, closer than almost anyone in the world, and they receive nothing at all. That is a very strange property for a tree to have. It is a completely ordinary property for a god, and it explains something that is otherwise quite hard to account for. A great many people in this world are miserable, and their misery is not distributed by geography. It is distributed by category. What you are born as determines what the light does for you, and the light is the same light, from the same source, at the same distance, doing different things to different people for reasons that have nothing to do with the optics. Chapter 3: Crumbling Farum Azula and the Scale that Breaks the Map. To understand what the Erdtree is doing to the geography of this world, it helps enormously to look at the one place that openly refuses to sit inside that geography at all. Crumbling Farum Azula is a city in the sky, in pieces mid collapse, and frozen exactly there. Not collapsing slowly, not collapsing in stages. Frozen in the act of falling. Stone slabs the size of city blocks hang in the air on their way down and never arrive. There is a storm turning through the middle of it that never exhausts itself and never moves on. Beams of masonry drift past you as you fight. It is one of the most disorienting spaces in the entire game, and it stays disorienting no matter how long you spend in it. And the architecture is not built to the scale of anything human. The stairs are too tall, the doorways are too tall, the halls run on far past any function a room could reasonably need. You are walking through a building made for something that was not shaped like you and did not need what you need. The obvious explanation is dragons, and dragons are certainly there in numbers. But look at what the city actually contains, because the contents matter more than the architecture. It holds the beast clergyman, who is Malekith, who is Marika's shadow. It holds Placidusax, a dragon lord who ruled before the Erdtree existed at all, still waiting in a place outside of time for a god who is never coming back for him. And it holds the site where destined death was sealed away, which is the single most consequential act in the entire backstory of the Golden Order. That is the connection worth keeping hold of. Farum Azula is not a curiosity floating somewhere off the edge of the map for flavor. It is where the Erdtree's most important surgery was carried out. The removal of death from the rules of the world happened up there in a city that exists slightly outside the ordinary flow of time, at a scale that matches nothing else in the world. And here is why it belongs in a night about the Erdtree. Everything about Farum Azula is an exception to the world's rules. Gravity does not finish what it started there. Time does not advance there. The scale does not correspond to the people who use it. And when you stand in it and look out, you are standing on a piece of the world that has been cut loose from the world's own physics, which is precisely exactly what the Erdtree does at the center of the map, except that the tree does it so constantly and so completely, and from the very first minute of the game, that almost nobody registers it as strange. Farum Azula is the exception that makes the rule visible. It is the same violation in a place small enough and strange enough that you actually notice. It is worth dwelling on the size of the place for its own sake, because the scale is doing something to you, whether or not you notice it. The great halls are built for bodies that do not walk on two legs. The bridges span distances that no procession would ever need to cross. The pillars go up past the point where any structural purpose could justify them into a sky that is itself full of falling masonry. You spend the entire area feeling slightly wrong sized, and that feeling is deliberate. And the reason it matters for tonight is that Farum Azula is the only place in the game that lets you experience, from the inside, what the Erdtree is doing to you from a distance. The tree keeps you small by being unreachably vast on the horizon. Farum Azula keeps you small by putting you inside a building meant for something else. Both are the same lesson delivered by different means, and only one of them lets you walk around in it and touch the walls. There is one more thing. Farum Azula is where the dragon's age ended and the Erdtree's age began, and it is still up there, still falling, never quite gone. The order that replaced the dragons did not manage to make their city stop existing. It only managed to make it stop arriving. Chapter 4. A Tree with No Roots You Can See. Every tree that has ever existed anywhere shares one basic structural fact. What stands above the ground has to be answered by something below it. The canopy needs an anchor. The wider the crown, the deeper and further the root system has to run, because the alternative is falling over. So where are the Erdtree's roots? Stand at the base of it in Lanedell and look for them. You will find no root flare where the trunk meets the earth, no great buttresses breaking up the paving stones, no visible point at which the tree becomes the ground. The trunk simply meets the city, and the city continues, as though the tree had been set down there rather than grown up out of anything. That absence is strange enough on its own, but the roots do exist, and where they are is where this whole night starts to turn. They are not underneath the tree, they are underneath everything else. Descend far enough in almost any part of the map, and you begin to find them. Enormous pale roots running through caverns that have no business containing them. Roots threading through cities that were buried long before the Golden Order started counting years. Roots holding up ceilings in places that were never meant to be seen by anyone, forming bridges, forming halls, forming the actual structural architecture of the underworld. The root system is not local, it is total. The tree is not anchored in one spot beneath the capital. It is anchored in everything, everywhere, underneath the entire world, in a layer of reality that most of the living never visit, and that the golden religion above never discusses in any detail. That distinction matters far more than it first appears. A tree with local roots is a landmark. It is a thing standing in a place. But a tree whose roots run under every region on the map is not standing in a place at all. It is the floor. It is what everything else has been built on top of, whether or not the builders ever knew, and whether or not the people living there today would consent to it if anyone asked. There is a second implication, and it is the darker one. Roots do not only anchor, roots draw. A root system that runs beneath every region in the world is not merely holding the tree up. It is reaching into every region in the world and taking something out of it. We will get to what it takes. But hold the image for now. A golden thing in the sky that everyone can see and nobody can touch, and underneath the entire world, in the dark, the parts of it that are actually doing the work. If you follow those roots down far enough, in the right place, you arrive somewhere that reframes the entire structure. Deep-root Depths sits at the bottom of a long fall beneath the capital, and it is the closest thing this world has to an underside of the Erdtree. Here the roots are not incidental scenery running through somebody else's architecture. Here they are the architecture. Vast pale trunks run overhead and underfoot, forming halls and bridges and vaulted spaces lit by a soft and faintly unhealthy glow, filled with water and with the drowned and with a great many things that were evidently put down here to be out of the way. The word people reach for is a mirror, and it is a good word for it. Above, in Lindell, there is gold, order, ceremony, and a religion that never stops explaining itself to anyone within earshot. Below, in Deeproot, there is silence, standing water, bodies, and a version of the same tree with all of the ceremony stripped off it. What is buried here is not random, and that is the first thing worth noticing. This is where the great and the noble were laid to rest. It is a resting place for the honored dead of a religion whose entire central promise was that death had been solved, and a striking number of them have not stayed properly rested. The whole area asks a question that the Golden City above spends all of its considerable energy avoiding. If the Erdtree is a machine for receiving the dead, then what does the intake look like? Deeproot's answer is a drowned hall full of bodies that never finished dying, tangled in roots, held in a condition that is neither living nor concluded, directly and vertically beneath the throne room of the people who told you death was no longer something you needed to worry about. There is something almost architectural about the honesty of it. In most stories, the shameful thing is hidden somewhere remote, off at the edges, requiring a journey. Here it is directly below. The capital is not next to its own contradiction. It is standing on it, and the only reason nobody sees it is that seeing it requires falling a very long way down, and the people who live up there have no reason to fall. You reach it most often by accident. That feels correct. Nobody in this world goes looking for the underside of their own religion on purpose. Chapter 5. The Prince Still Rooted There. At the very bottom of that place, you find him. Godwin the Golden was the firstborn of Marika and Godfrey, and by every account the game gives you, he was genuinely and uncomplicatedly beloved, not feared the way Radon was feared, not merely respected the way Morgo was respected by the few who bothered, loved, loved by the people, loved by the knights, and loved, remarkably, by the dragons he fought, who taught him their own arts and mourned him afterwards. That is not a sentence you can write about anybody else in this entire story. He was killed on the night of the Black Knives, and the manner of his killing is the hinge that the whole plot of the game turns on. His soul died, his body did not. That is not a poetic way of describing a tragedy. It is a technical description of what a stolen fragment of destined death was used to accomplish. Death, in this world, had been removed from the rules. What the assassins used was a piece of it, smuggled back in, and it was aimed at exactly half of him. And so, at the bottom of Deeproot depths, tangled into the roots of the Erdtree itself, is Godwin's face. Enormous, distorted half-prince and half-tree, mouth open, eyes closed. Still, in some sense that nobody in the game is willing to define with any precision, growing. He is called the Prince of Death. What spread outward from him is what the world calls Deathblight. The people who followed in its wake are those who live in death. And every single one of those things is treated by the Golden Order as an obscenity to be hunted rather than a problem to be understood or solved. Sit with the geography of that for a moment, because in this game, the geography is very often the argument. The Golden Order's greatest shame is not hidden in a far corner of the map. It is not out past the mountains or across a sea. It is directly vertically beneath its own capital city, grown into the roots of its own holy tree, in a chamber you reach by falling. The religion that promised to end death has a dead prince in its foundations who cannot finish dying, and its official response for a very long time has been to keep building upward and to not discuss it. There is a detail here that is easy to move past. Godwin's death is what starts everything. The Night of the Black Knives leads to the death of Godwin, which leads to Marika shattering the Elden Ring, which leads to the shattering, which leads to the war, which leads to you. Every hour you spend in this world is downstream of one murder that only half worked, and the half that did not work is still down there in the roots, quietly getting larger. There is a sword in this game that is in effect a letter. The golden epitaph belongs to Godwin's mourners, and its whole purpose is to lay the dead to rest, not to kill, to finish. In a world where death has been removed from the fundamental rules, an object whose function is to allow something to properly end is not a weapon. It is a kindness that the world's own laws have made almost impossible to offer. The people who carry it are the remnants of those who loved Godwin, and their situation is one of the quietest tragedies in this story. They are grieving a man who has not finished dying. They cannot bury him because he is not dead in the way burial requires. They cannot resurrect him because his soul is genuinely gone. They cannot even mourn him properly because mourning has an end, and this does not. And the institution they belong to, the Golden Order that Godwin's own family built, has classified what happened to him as an obscenity. The thing at the bottom of Deeproot is not treated as a prince who was murdered. It is treated as the origin point of a contamination, and the official response to it is containment and denial. So his mourners are left holding a sword designed to give rest, in a religion that abolished rest, for a man who cannot receive it. There is something almost unbearably human in that. Every institution eventually produces a category of grief it cannot process, and then asks the people carrying that grief to be quiet about it for the good of everyone else. The Golden Order did it at the scale of a god's firstborn son, and the answer it arrived at was to build upward and stop saying his name. The Erdtree took him in. It did not let him go, and the people who loved him have been standing at the edge of that for an age, with the only tool that might have helped, unable to reach him. Chapter 6. The Cities Buried to Make Room. Godwin is not the only thing under the world that the surface would prefer you did not find. Nokron, the Eternal City, sits in a vast cavern beneath Limgrave, complete and intact, and profoundly disorienting the first time you see it. It is not a ruin in the ordinary sense of a place that fell down and was left. It is a whole city. Towers, bridges, streets, staircases, buildings with interiors. All of it under a ceiling of rock, lit by something that is not the sun. The story of how it got down there is told in fragments, the way most things in this world are told, and it goes roughly like this. Nokron was struck from the surface, not besieged by a neighbor, not lost to a slow decline, not abandoned. Cast down deliberately as an act of divine punishment at approximately the point when the Erdtree's order was establishing itself as the order. It was buried the way you bury something you do not want anyone to be able to visit. Look at the sequence that implies, because it is not a small thing, the Golden Order does not simply outcompete the faiths that came before it. It does not merely convert their populations or absorb their temples. It takes an entire civilization intact and it puts it underground. And then it builds a religion on the surface whose central promise is that everything is illuminated, everything is ordered, and nothing important is hidden. And the roots are already down there waiting when you arrive. They run through Nokron the way they run through everything beneath the world, threading between the buildings, over the rooftops, through the streets. Which raises a question the game never answers directly and very clearly enjoys not answering. Did the tree's roots grow down into the buried city afterwards, spreading opportunistically into a space that had conveniently been cleared out for them? Or was the burial itself the tree-making room? Nothing in the text settles it, but the arrangement of the world keeps making the same suggestion over and over. Wherever something older than the Golden Order used to be, there is now a root, and there is now silence, and there is now a great deal of stone between it and the sky. Deeper still is Nokstella, Nokron's twin, and it is here that a second theology becomes fully visible underneath the first one. These cities did not worship the Erdtree. They were not heretical branches of the Golden Faith or lapsed provinces of it. They were built around an entirely different principle, one associated with the moon, with night, with the stars, and with a form of authority that has nothing whatsoever to do with golden light. Their remnants are full of silver and dark stone and imagery that the Golden Order would consider not merely foreign, but actively blasphemous. This is where Rani's entire storyline is rooted, and it is why her ending has the particular flavor that it has. When she takes the world into an age of stars, she is not inventing something out of nothing. She is restoring, or at least re-electing, something that was already here, that was already whole, and that was put underground so that the gold could have the sky to itself. What that tells you about the tree is significant, and it is not flattering. The Erdtree is not the natural original condition of this world, from which later faiths deviated into error. It is one order among several, and it is the one that won. The eternal cities are the physical evidence of the losing side, preserved in genuinely remarkable condition, sitting directly beneath the winner's feet. And once you have seen that, the Erdtree's total route network reads differently again. It is not only infrastructure, it is occupation. Those routes run through the buried cities of the previous order, like fingers closed around something that has been taken and is not going to be given back. There is a particular kind of silence in Noxtella that is worth listening to if you ever go back. It is not the silence of a place that has been destroyed. It is the silence of a place that is still standing, with the lights still on in some fashion, and nobody in it. The Golden Order did not raise this. Raising leaves rubble, and rubble tells you a war happened. This is neater than that. This is a whole civilization put in a drawer, and the drawer closed, and a new house built on top of the furniture. Above both of those cities, and reached long before either of them, is Seofra, and Seofra is where most players first experience the specific variety of vertigo that this world is so unusually good at producing. You take a lift down in Limgrave expecting a cave. What you get is a horizon. There is a wide, slow river. There is grassland. There are standing stones, enormous ones, carved and deliberate. And there is a sky overhead with stars in it, and you are several hundred meters underground with solid rock where the atmosphere is supposed to be. The stars are not stars, and the game never explains the mechanism, which is exactly the right decision. What matters is the effect it has on you, which is a sudden and permanent loss of confidence about which parts of this world are sitting on top of which other parts. After Seofra, every lift in the game is a question. Every hole is a maybe. Seofra also has its own faith, and this is the part that matters for tonight. There are vast stone constructions here that nobody on the surface built. There are the ancestral followers who keep to something considerably older than gold and older than the moon both, centered on a great horned spirit that has no relationship at all to the surface religion. Their imagery is antlers and wood and animal forms, and it is entirely uninterested in the Erdtree's existence. So the count is now at least 3, gold above, moon and stars in the eternal cities, and this, older still, in the river valleys under Limgrave, quietly continuing in the dark with its own dead and its own rites. The Erdtree presents itself in every piece of official theology you will encounter on the surface as the singular and inevitable center of all things. It is the Erdtree. There is one. Everything orbits it. 2 lifts and a long descent. Later, you are standing under a false sky, in a country with its own religion and its own ancestors, looking up at solid rock where the tree ought to be, and nothing down here has ever heard of the Golden Order or cared. That is the most quietly subversive geography in the entire game, not a rebellion against the tree, an indifference to it. Chapter 7, The Lake of Rot and the Fingers Beneath Everything. Follow the underground further, and you reach a place that puts a genuine crack in the idea that the tree is simply the healthy center of an unhealthy world. The Lake of Rot is precisely what its name promises, an enormous shallow basin of scarlet corruption deep underground past Noxtella that will kill you steadily and unglamorously just for standing in it. There are stepping stones. There are things living in it that should not be living in anything. It sits beneath the world like an infected wound underneath a bandage that nobody has changed in a very long time, and running through it, into it, drinking from it, are the roots. That image deserves to be held still for a moment, because the surface theology has no comfortable answer for it at all. Scarlet rot is presented by the Golden Order as an outer god's disease, a foreign contamination, the thing Melania carries in her body and the thing Kaled died of. It is the enemy of the Golden Order in the most literal available sense, another god's power, growing inside the world, spreading. And yet here is the holy tree, at its own foundations, with its roots down in the rot. There are a few readings available, and they are worth laying out honestly, rather than picking the most dramatic one. Perhaps the tree is fighting it, containing it, holding the infection down there and away from the surface, and what you are seeing is a quarantine rather than a meal. Perhaps the tree is simply indifferent, and roots go where there is moisture, and the moisture down here happens to be poison. Or perhaps the least comfortable reading is the accurate one, and the sharp distinction the religion draws between Golden Order above and outer corruption below is a story told on the surface by people who have never once gone down to look at what the roots are actually touching. The game gives you the image and firmly declines to interpret it for you, which is its habit and its strength. But it does choose to put that image at the bottom of the world, underneath everything else, in exactly the direction the roots have been running this whole time. You climb back out of the Lake of Rot, and you ride up to the surface, and the tree is on the horizon, gold and clean and enormous, and you now know something about it that nobody in Lendel knows. While you are down there, there is one more thing worth noticing, and it is the strangest of all of them. Beneath the world, in more than one place, there are fingers, enormous, pale, jointed, gathered together in nests, twitching slightly. They are associated with the two fingers, and through them with the greater will, which is to say with the outer god, that the entire Golden Order claims as its ultimate source of authority. The two fingers you meet in the Round Table hold are presented with a great deal of dignity. They are messengers. They translate the will of something distant into instructions that Tarnished can act on. They require a finger reader to interpret them, because they do not communicate in any language a person could simply learn. They are the interface between this world and whatever is supposedly running it, and the whole apparatus of the Round Table treats them with the reverence you would expect. And then you find the nests. There are a great many of them down there. They are grown rather than built. Some are dying, some are already dead, and some are still moving. They sit in the dark alongside the roots and the buried cities and the rot in the same layer of the world as everything else the surface has decided not to look at. The relationship between the fingers and the Erdtree is never stated cleanly anywhere in the game, and that ambiguity is clearly deliberate. But the physical arrangement of the world keeps making the same suggestion without ever quite saying it. The tree's authority comes from something outside the world. That something's presence inside the world takes this particular form. And this form lives underground, in the dark, in numbers, alongside the graves of everything the Golden Order defeated. There is a further detail that lands harder the more you think about it. Several characters in this story reach the conclusion that the two fingers are broken, that they have been misreading their instructions or receiving nothing at all for a very long time and continuing to issue guidance anyway out of habit or malfunction. If that is true, then the chain of command for the entire Golden World runs from an absent god through a damaged interface to a tree that has locked its own door. Chapter 8: The Trees That Appeared Overnight. Come back up to the surface now, because there is a problem waiting there that most players ride straight past on their way to something else. Scattered across the lands between are the minor Erdtrees, smaller golden trees, glowing with the same light, standing in their own clearings, guarded by something unpleasant. There is one in Limgrave, one in Caelid, one in Liurnia, one on the Altus Plateau, and others besides. They are unmistakably the same kind of thing as the Great Tree, at a fraction of the scale. Now ask the question the game has been quietly waiting for you to ask since the first one you rode past. Where did they come from? They are not saplings. This is the important part. They are not young versions of the big one, patiently growing toward maturity over the course of an age. They are full-formed, mature, fully lit, and they arrived recently enough that the world still remembers a time before they were there. The mechanism the game offers has to do with seeds and with the Erdtree's own reproduction, and this is exactly where the arithmetic gets strange again, in the same way it got strange in Chapter 2. A structure on the scale of the Erdtree, operating on anything like the time scale that governs actual trees, would take a span beyond any record to produce offspring at all. Real trees of great size are slow in proportion to their size. That is not a rule anybody chose. It is what growth costs. But the minor Erdtrees are treated throughout as a feature of the current world rather than of deep prehistory. They are recent. Something about how they appear is fast, which pushes you straight back toward the reading from the very first chapter of tonight. Whatever this thing at the center of the world actually is, it is not obeying the ordinary constraints of growth any more than it obeys the ordinary constraints of visibility or the ordinary constraints of scale. It seeds, it spreads, it puts working copies of itself across an entire continent, at scale, quickly, and it does so in a world where nothing else grows like that. That is not the behavior of a plant. That is the behavior of an installation. Their function turns out to be much easier to establish than their origin, and the function is where they stop being scenery and start being infrastructure. Around each minor Erdtree you will find graves, not one or two, catacombs, tombs, burial grounds, whole networks of the dead clustered around their feet, like a town clustered around a well. That is not an accident of level design or a convenient place to put a dungeon. That is the system working exactly as intended. The Erdtree takes in the dead, souls return to it, are held within it, and are cycled back out into the world. That is the promise of the Golden Order at its most basic and most appealing level, and it is the thing that made the whole arrangement worth believing in for millions of people across an age. Nothing is lost. Everything returns. Death is not a wall, but a doorway, in a building you already live in, tended by people who know your name. The minor Erdtrees are the local branches of that system. A region does not need to carry its dead across a continent to the capital, because there is a smaller version of the tree standing right here, doing the same work, on the same principle, at a scale appropriate to the population it serves. And that is precisely why the Erdtree burial watchdogs exist. Those stone beasts, sitting silent in the dark of the catacombs, hostile to anything that comes through the door, are not guarding treasure. There is rarely much treasure. They are guarding the intake. There is something quietly bleak in the arrangement once you can see the whole of it at once. Every region of this world has a golden tree at its center and a field of graves at its base, and the graves are the entire reason the tree is standing there. The light is genuinely beautiful. The people who live near it are genuinely comforted by it, and the infrastructure underneath the light is a mortuary. That is not a criticism of the people who believe in it. It is very hard to look at a system that takes your dead and promises to keep them, and see anything other than mercy, particularly if you have just lost somebody. It is the thing every religion in our own world has been trying to offer for as long as there have been religions, and this one appears to actually deliver. But it does mean that when you ride past a minor Erdtree, glowing softly in its clearing with the ruins of a burial ground around it, you are not looking at a monument. You are looking at a working part of a machine, still running, still collecting, in a world where the central authority that built it has locked its own door and stopped answering. Chapter 9: The Sap, the Amber, and the Things It Grows. The tree also produces material, and the material is worth examining closely because it gets used for things that a tree's output has no business being used for. There is amber, and there is sap, and running consistently through everything attached to them is a single idea. The Erdtree's substance holds things. It preserves, it captures, and it keeps. Not just moisture or nutrients, but memory, essence, some quality of a person that ought by rights to be gone once the person is gone. The most direct expression of this is the Erdtree's role in the cycle itself. Souls do not disperse into nothing. They are gathered, retained, and returned. That is the entire promise. But once you look at amber as the physical, holdable form of that same principle sitting in your inventory, the promise starts to look somewhat less like salvation and rather more like storage. Amber, after all, is famous in our world for exactly one thing. It holds something that died a very long time ago in precisely the position it was in when it died, perfectly preserved and completely unable to leave. The Golden Order sells the cycle as a mercy, and for a great many people across a great many centuries, it evidently functioned as one. But the same system, described plainly and without the theology attached, is a machine that collects everything that dies within its reach and does not let go of any of it. Whether that reads to you as heaven or as a jar depends almost entirely on whether you are currently inside it. And Godwin, at the bottom of deep root depths, is what happens when something gets caught in the storage medium, and the storage medium cannot process what it has caught. He is not outside the system. He is very much inside it, held, preserved, unable to leave, exactly like a thing in amber. He is the amber problem, at the scale of a prince, and he has been that way for longer than most of the people reading his name have been alive. There is one more thread worth pulling. The tree's substance also produces things that heal you, strengthen you, and extend what you are capable of. The golden runes you pick up off the ground are, in a real sense, distributed pieces of the same essence. You are constantly consuming small quantities of the tree's output in order to keep going, which means that every player, on every playthrough, without ever thinking about it, has been running on the tree the entire time. Whatever else the Erdtree is, it is the thing that has been keeping you upright since the first minute. The minor Erdtrees are guarded, and their guardians are among the more unsettling designs in the entire game once you actually stop and look at one properly, rather than simply killing it. The Erdtree avatars are enormous, lumpen, roughly humanoid masses of bark and wood and root, carrying a great club, moving with a slow, heavy rocking gait that suggests something considerably less coordinated than a person. They are not soldiers who have been posted to a location by a commander. They are not constructs somebody assembled. They appear in every way the game presents them to be the tree's own response to intrusion, produced by it, made of it. There are two things about them worth noticing, and both cut against the official theology. The first is that they are ugly, and they are ugly in a very specific way. Everything the Golden Order's human institutions produce is beautiful. The armor is elegant. The architecture is graceful and vertical and full of light. The sorceries are geometric and clean and precise. Lindell is one of the most beautiful cities anybody has built in a video game. But the thing the tree makes on its own, with no human hand shaping it and no artisan involved, is a sagging, blunt faced mass that swings a club and moans. Whatever aesthetic sense governs the Golden Order, it belongs to the people, not to the tree. The tree's own taste, left to itself, produces something closer to a swamp thing than a saint. The second thing is that they imply agency, and agency is the one property the surface theology is most careful never to grant the tree. Something has to decide to produce a guardian. Something has to identify a threat and respond and place the response at a specific site. A tree that produces defenders at the locations it cares about is not an object being worshipped. It is a participant with preferences that is genuinely difficult for the Golden Order to accommodate, because the Golden Order is extremely precise about where it locates will. The greater will decides, Marika enacts. The tree is supposed to be the medium, the vessel, the holy thing, rather than the acting thing. It is scripture, not author. Avatars complicate all of that. They suggest that the tree, at some level below or beside the theology built around it, notices objects and defends itself. And they suggest it wants, in whatever way a thing like this can want anything, to be left alone, which fits rather uncomfortably well with a tree that has sealed its own door against the entire population of a world that was called back specifically to save it. Chapter 10: The Haligtree Built to Rival It. If the minor Erdtrees are the Erdtree's own copies of itself, then the Haligtree is somebody else's deliberate attempt to build one from scratch, on purpose, as an argument. Mikola planted it, and every single element of that act is a criticism of the thing we have been looking at all night. He grew it in the far north, deliberately distant from the capital and from the tree it was answering. He grew it for the people the Golden Order had discarded, the misbegotten and the Albinorics, and anyone else the gold had decided it had no place for. He built a city up in its branches, called it a haven, and openly invited exactly the populations that Lindell had swept into sewers, hunted across open country, or quietly stopped counting. That is not a private religious project or a personal eccentricity. It is a rebuttal planted in soil on a continental scale by someone with the power to make the argument physically. And it is worth being precise about why he needed a tree of his own at all, because the detail matters. Mikola was a demigod. He was Empyrean, which is the highest thing a person can be in this world, short of becoming a god outright. He was blessed with essentially everything the Golden Order had to give, and cursed by that same order with eternal childhood, a body that would never grow, in a religion that promised to make everything whole. He tried, by his own account, and by the accounts left scattered around his work, several different routes to fix what was wrong with him and with the world. He studied, he experimented, he built, and at the end of all of it, he gave up on the Erdtree, not on gods, not on order, not even on the fundamental idea of a great tree standing at the center of things, since he went out and planted one. He gave up on this tree specifically, having had more access to it and more reason to hope for it than almost anybody in the story. The Haligtree is therefore a second opinion made physical, standing in the north where anyone can see it. It is a permanent argument that the Golden System is not the only possible arrangement of the world, that a tree could be planted with a different set of priorities and a different guest list, and that a person with every advantage the Golden Order could confer looked at it closely and concluded it was beyond repair, except that it did not work, and the particular way in which it failed is more instructive than any success would have been. The Haligtree never fully came into its own. Mikola's power is repeatedly associated with an unalloyed gold that resists corruption, and with an unripened rune, and the vocabulary of unripeness follows him absolutely everywhere he goes in this story. Something in the project stayed unfinished. Something in him stayed unfinished too, and the two facts are clearly the same fact. Meanwhile, the haven filled up with the people it had promised to shelter. Mikala's sister Melania was its shield and its defender, and Melania had carried scarlet rot in her body since birth, as her half of the same curse that kept her brother a child. She was by any measure the most formidable warrior of her generation, and she was also a walking reservoir of the one thing the Golden Order most feared. When she finally lost her long duel with Radon, or more precisely when she won it by unleashing what she had been holding in all her life, she bloomed. Kaled is what that looks like from outside. And later, at the end of a very long and very difficult climb, you find that the great tree of refuge has rot in it too. The haven that was built for the discarded became a place of decay, guarded by a woman who was herself the decay, in branches that never quite ripened. That is not a moral judgment on Mikala, whose intentions read as sincere throughout, and whose grievance was entirely legitimate. It is a structural observation, and it is the one that matters for tonight. He tried to build a better version of the same machine with better motives than anybody else in the story had, and the machine still produced a horror at its center. Which raises the question that hangs over the whole of this night, and which I do not think the game ever fully answers. Is the problem the Erdtree specifically? Some flaw in this particular tree, this particular god, this particular order? Or is the problem the shape itself? A single enormous authority at the center of everything, collecting the dead, deciding who counts as a person, producing guardians to keep the curious away, and putting whatever it cannot process somewhere underneath, where the people who benefit from the arrangement will never have to look at it. Mikala ran that experiment under the best possible conditions. He got rot in the branches and a sister who could not stop bleeding. Chapter 11. The Scadutree and the Shadow that Casts It. Then the Shadow Realm opens, and the question changes shape entirely. Beyond the Gate of Divinity, in the land that the Erdtree's shadow covers, there is another tree, the Scadutree, and it is not a rival like the Haligtree, not a copy like the minor Erdtrees, and not a rebellion. It is presented as something closer to a counterpart, older in some readings, and deeply and inextricably entwined with the Erdtree's own existence. The Shadow Realm is where the Golden Order's origin was hidden. That is the plainest way to put it. It is where Marika came from. It is where the Horn-sent civilization was, with its jars and its towers and its own ideas about divinity. It is where the crucible imagery runs strongest and oldest. And it is where a very great deal of what the Golden Religion did in order to establish itself was carried out, and then sealed behind a gate so that nobody would come back and ask about it. The Scadutree sits at the center of that hidden country in exactly the way the Erdtree sits at the center of the visible one. The most striking implication is one of simple concealment, and it is worth stating baldly. This world's golden center casts a shadow large enough to hide an entire realm inside it. That realm has its own tree, its own history, its own peoples, and its own atrocities, and it was sealed off so thoroughly that the overwhelming majority of the lands between has no idea it exists at all. A tree with a shadow you can walk into, a shadow with a whole country in it, and that country is precisely where the answers to the Golden Religion's founding questions were put, at a comfortable distance from anyone likely to start asking them. There is something almost too neat about it as an image, and I mean that as praise. The thing at the center of the world is so large and so bright that the darkness it throws is itself a place. You can go there, you can walk around in it, and what you find when you do is not emptiness, but a fully realized civilization that the light has been standing on top of for an age. Every religion has a founding story it tells, and a founding story it does not. In this world, the one it does not tell is not merely unspoken, it has a geography, a gate, and a tree of its own. Why would the shadow have a tree of its own at all? What is it doing there? The Scadutree's function is bound up with shadow, with protection, and with a form of blessing that operates specifically in the realm the Erdtree's light does not reach. Its influence is what makes you stronger there, and that mechanical detail carries more thematic weight than it first appears to. In the ordinary world, under the Erdtree, you grow stronger by taking runes from the dead. Everything you kill gives you something, and you spend it on yourself, and that is the entire economy of your progress from the first minute of the game to the last. Strength in the lands between is accumulated death converted into capability. In the Shadow Realm, under the Scadutree, you grow stronger by finding fragments of the tree itself. Proximity to it is what raises you. The dead are not the currency. Two trees, two economies, and the one hidden behind the gate, in the country nobody is supposed to visit, is the one that does not run on corpses. Then there is the matter of the crucible, which is where this gets genuinely pointed. In the Shadowlands, crucible imagery is everywhere you look. Horns, roots, feathers, tails, the mixed and unsorted forms of early life, all tangled together in single bodies. The Golden Order treats crucible traits as impurity, as deformity, as a thing to be corrected or concealed. Being born with horns in Lendel gets you sealed underneath the city for the duration of your life. But in the older places, and most of all here, the crucible is presented as the primordial state of the tree itself, the condition it came out of, before it was refined and pruned and clarified into something orderly and golden and extremely particular about who belongs. Which means the Golden Order has spent its entire existence hunting its own origin. It has been calling the thing it grew out of a deformity, sealing the children who display it under its own capital, and building an increasingly beautiful city on top of the evidence. Morgo, who was one of those children, defended that city with everything he had until the moment he died. He knew what he was. He knew what they had done to him and to his brother, and he stood at the gate of the capital that had buried him and fought for the tree anyway. Sitting alongside all of the golden imagery, in odd corners of this world, there is a persistent strain of red. You find it in the Crucible Knights, who serve an older idea of what the tree was. You find it in ancient heroes, whose forms are half animal and entirely unbothered about it. You find it in dragon cults that predate the Golden Order by an age. And above all, you find it in the imagery of a great tree that is not gold at all, but something older and rawer, and considerably less concerned with being beautiful. The evidence for this is scattered rather than declarative, which is how this game prefers to work. Certain incantations that draw on crucible power, certain root formations that do not match the golden aesthetic, certain physical traits, horns and wings and tails, that keep being described in official sources as remnants of the crucible, always in the particular tone that people use for an embarrassing relative. What holds all of it together is the direction of travel, and the direction is remarkably consistent once you start looking for it. Everywhere in this world, the older a thing is, the more mixed it is. Horns and feathers and roots and flesh all present in one body, unsorted, uncategorized, growing into each other. And everywhere in this world, the newer and more golden a thing is, the more sorted it is. Categories, laws, hierarchies, fingers that point, and an enormous amount of institutional energy spent on determining what does not belong. The Erdtree, read in that light, is not the beginning of this story at all. It is the result of it. It is what you get when something wilder gets pruned repeatedly over a very long time by people with an extremely firm idea of what a proper shape looks like, until the shape is finally beautiful and every part that was cut away is living underneath the city in the dark. This is why the omen matters so much more than their screen time suggests. They are not monsters that wandered in from outside. They are the tree's own inheritance, surfacing in the royal bloodline, generation after generation, exactly as it always did before somebody decided it was shameful. Morgoth and Maug were born with the tree's own older nature written on their bodies, in the family that ruled in the tree's name, and the response of that family was a sewer. The Crucible is not a corruption of the Golden Order. The Golden Order is a correction of the Crucible, and corrections in this world are always enforced downward onto the people least able to argue. Chapter 12, The Promise. Every grace makes. Now let us look at the part of the tree that you actually interact with, constantly, for 100 hours, without ever once thinking about it as part of the tree at all. Sites of grace are small golden lights scattered across the entire world. You touch one and you rest. Resting restores your flask, restores your health, resets the enemies around you, and lets you travel. Mechanically, they are convenience and comfort, and the reason the game is playable. Narratively, they are the Erdtree's fingertips, reaching into every corner of the map you are ever expected to walk through. Grace is the tree's attention. That is not a metaphor I am imposing on it. To be graced is to be seen and approved of by the Golden Order. When grace was withdrawn from the Tarnished, they lost their place in the world and were exiled from it entirely. When grace returned to them, they were called back across the sea to serve a purpose. The little lights at the roadside are not a neutral utility bolted onto the world. They are a relationship, and the relationship has terms attached to it that nobody ever reads out loud. Then look at what a sight of grace actually does when you touch it. It sends out a thin golden thread, pointing where to go next. The game presents this as guidance, and every player receives it as guidance because it is genuinely helpful and because being lost is unpleasant. But read it a half step differently, and it is instruction. The tree tells you where it wants you to be. You go there. It restores you when you arrive, and then it points again. Most people follow those threads for their entire first playthrough without ever treating them as a narrative object at all. They are furniture, they are the interface. But by the time you are standing in front of the Elden Beast, being invited to become Elden Lord and mend what was broken, the question of who exactly has been steering you toward this outcome and from how early in your journey is not a paranoid one. The lights were there from the first minute you woke up in that chapel. Every single one of them was pointing, and the destination they were pointing at, patiently over 100 hours, was the inside of the tree. You are not wandering. You are being brought in. The distribution of grace across the map is worth reading as a political document, because that is effectively what it is. Grace is dense wherever the Golden Order's story wants you to walk. Along the roads, through the castles, up the mountain toward the capital. It thins out and disappears in the places the Order has abandoned or lost or refuses to acknowledge as part of its world. There is a reason the deep underground feels so profoundly lonely, and it is not entirely about the lighting or the absence of music. Grace can also be corrupted or replaced. In places where other powers have taken firm hold, you find lights that are not gold and do not offer the same terms. The system has competitors, and you can read the state of a very long war simply by noting where the golden lights stop. So the network is not universal. However universal, it presents itself as being. It is contested territory, mapped in light, and the map is honest even when the theology is not. There is one further inference available here, and it is the one that sits least comfortably. If grace is the tree's attention, then the tree has attention. It notices where you are. It responds to what you do. It withdraws from those it has no use for and returns to those it does. You can call that a game system, and you would be entirely correct to. But this world has been extraordinarily consistent about turning its game systems into theology, and the theology here is not subtle once stated plainly. The thing at the center of the world is watching. It has preferences, and it rewards obedience with rest. Consider what that means for the tarnished specifically. Grace was taken from them, en masse as a group, for reasons never fully explained to any of them. They wandered and died and were forgotten. And then grace came back all at once, and every one of them felt the call and started traveling toward the same place. Nobody in the Round Table hold treats this as suspicious. It is regarded as an honor, a summons, a second chance. But the plain description of the event is that an enormous number of people had their agency switched off, left in the dark for an age, and then switched back on at the exact moment they became useful again. And there is one more thing this network does for you, constantly, from the first hour to the last, which almost nobody reads as a theological claim because it arrives dressed as a game mechanic. The most radical thing the Erdtree does is the thing that every single player treats as completely ordinary within about 10 minutes of starting. You die constantly in this game. You die to a bird on a cliff in the first 20 minutes, and you die to a god at the very end, and hundreds of times in between, and every single time you get up. The world calls this the curse of the tarnished. The tarnished themselves treat it as a mixed blessing at best, and several of them speak about it with real bitterness. But the mechanism underneath it is the Erdtree's cycle, running on you personally over and over. Now hold that against Godwin at the bottom of Deeproot. Godwin's soul died and his body could not. You are, in a precise sense, the mirror image of that condition. Your body keeps ending, and something in you refuses to be finished. Both of you are failures of the same system, in opposite directions. He cannot leave. You cannot stay. And then hold both of those against those who live in death, who are hunted across the entire world for the crime of not having gone quietly into the tree when they were supposed to. Their existence is treated as an obscenity requiring an organized response. There are hunters, there is an apparatus, there is a whole institution devoted to the problem. So there are 3 states available in this world. There are the proper dead, gathered up into the cycle, returned, recirculated, praised. There are the improper dead, pursued and destroyed for having come loose. And then there is you, dying endlessly and returning endlessly, and being called blessed for it. The difference between blessed and abomination in this world is not a difference of condition. Look carefully at the 3, and you will see the mechanism is essentially identical in each case. Something did not end properly. The difference is usefulness. The tree returns you because you are being pointed at something it wants done. It hunts them because they came loose from the machine with no purpose attached to them and no task they could be sent on. That is the whole moral architecture of the Golden Order in a single comparison, not a distinction between the holy and the unholy, a distinction between the useful and the surplus, dressed up in gold and defended with an army. If Godwin is what happens to the cycle by accident, the Dung Eater is what happens when somebody attacks it on purpose. He is the most straightforwardly repellent figure in the game, and the game does not ask you to like him or to find hidden depths in his cruelty. What he does to people is monstrous, and he enjoys it. But his goal, stripped of everything else, is a direct assault on the Erdtree's central function, and it is worth understanding. He wants to curse people. Specifically, he wants to defile them so thoroughly that the cycle cannot take them back. His victims do not return to the tree. They do not get gathered up and recirculated and given whatever comfort the Golden Promise offers. They are ruined in a way that puts them permanently outside it, and their descendants with them. That is what he is actually doing. not murder. Murder in this world is temporary, and the tree cleans up afterwards. He is severing people from the system that would otherwise catch them, and that tells you exactly how total the Erdtree's hold on this world is. In order to hurt somebody permanently in the lands between, you cannot simply kill them. You have to find a way to make the tree refuse them. The only real violence available is exclusion, which is uncomfortably the same instrument the Golden Order itself uses. It sealed the omen under the capital. It hunts those who live in death. It withdrew grace from an entire population of tarnished and left them to wander. The Order's ultimate sanction, the thing it does to those it will not accept, is to cut them out of the cycle. The Dung Eater is doing at the level of individual cruelty what the institution does at the level of policy. That is not a defense of him. It is an observation about what kind of world this is, where the worst thing one person can do to another is the same thing the state does to entire categories of people, and one of them is a crime, and the other is theology. Chapter 13: The Ring Inside the Trunk. Underneath everything we have looked at so far is the object the game is actually named after, and its location is the single strangest fact in this entire night. The Elden Ring is not a crown in a vault. It is not a relic in a temple guarded by an order of knights. It is not a thing you can pick up and carry. It is inside the tree. The tree is, in every functional sense, its housing. The ring is described as the fundamental order of the world, and it is made of great runes, each of which governs some basic principle of existence: life, death, growth, order. Together they are not a symbol of how the world works, in the way a flag is a symbol of a country. They are how the world works, in the way that physical law is how our own world works. They are the rules, in object form. Marika shattered it. That is the event this entire game is downstream of, and when it shattered, the rune of death having already been surgically removed long before, the principles came apart and scattered into the demigods, who immediately went to war with each other over the pieces. So the arrangement, stated plainly, is this: there is a machine at the center of the world that determines the rules of reality. That machine lives inside a tree. The tree is visible from everywhere and reachable from nowhere. A god broke the machine deliberately, on purpose, for reasons she never fully explains to anyone, and the entire world you have been walking through is the wreckage of that one decision, still settling. The tree is not a holy site with a relic in it. The tree is the case around the engine, and that reframes everything from the opening of tonight. It does not shrink with distance because it is not standing at a distance in the ordinary sense at all. It is visible from every corner of the world because what sits inside it is the reason the world has corners in the first place. You cannot walk up and put a hand on it because it is not a landmark waiting patiently in the world to be visited by anyone who makes the journey. It is the housing for the thing that makes the world be the way it is, and the world is arranged around it the way a room is arranged around a load-bearing wall. Nobody goes to visit the wall. The wall is the reason there is a room. Every question we have asked tonight about how this thing behaves has the same answer sitting underneath it. The visibility, the scale, the inaccessibility, the roots running under every region, the seeds that arrive full grown, the guardians it produces without being asked. We were never looking at a very large tree that happened to be strange. We were looking at the outside of something else entirely, wearing bark. There is a reading, and I find it persuasive, in which the tree grew around the ring rather than the ring being placed inside the tree, which would mean the golden thing everybody worships is the packaging, and always was. Each demigod holds a shard, and each shard is a piece of the operating principles of reality, and this is why the war between them was never really a family quarrel about a throne. Radon, Rykard, Morgo, Moog, Melania, Renala, Godric. They are usually described quite reasonably as siblings and cousins, and in laws fighting over succession. That is how the histories in the game frame it, and that is how most people summarize the shattering when asked. But look at what they are actually holding. Each one has a fragment of the rules of existence, and each one is warped into the shape of what they hold. Rykard eats gods and becomes a serpent that consumes without end. Melania carries rot, and when she finally blooms, she rewrites an entire region of the map into a red waste that will still be red an age later. Radon holds the stars in place with gravity, and an entire school of astrologers finds that their future has simply stopped moving because one man is standing in the sky's way. Godric, holding almost nothing at all, grafts other people's limbs onto his own body in a desperate and pitiable imitation of having any power whatsoever. Read that way, the shattering is not a succession crisis. It is a system failure with casualties in the millions. When the operating principles of reality get distributed among a handful of deeply traumatized people with legitimate grievances and no supervision, the result is not a war over a chair. It is a world where gravity, decay, growth, and death itself begin behaving according to the personal psychology of whoever happens to be holding the relevant fragment. Kaled is not a battlefield. Kaled is what happens when two of those fragments meet in one place and one of them loses, and every single one of those fragments came out of the tree. Every great rune you carry to a divine tower is a piece of what was inside it. When you restore one and use it, you are briefly holding a working component of the machinery of the world, taken from a corpse, authorized at a tower, and spent on making yourself temporarily harder to kill. Nobody in the game ever remarks on how strange that is. Standing around the map are the divine towers, and their function is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that this entire arrangement was engineered rather than grown. They are enormous, they are unmistakably built, they are directly connected to the great runes, and a demigod's rune has to be restored at one before it can be used for anything at all. They are, in effect, the authorization terminals for the fragments of the world's operating system, distributed across a continent, each one waiting for somebody to bring it a piece. That is an extraordinary thing for a religion to possess. Not shrines, not temples, not places of worship at all, really. Infrastructure. And it tells you something important that the theology never states. The Elden Ring was not simply a mystical unity that happened to exist at the center of things since the beginning of time. Somebody, at some point, put in place a distributed system of towers tied to a central object housed inside a tree with a specific and repeatable procedure for making the component pieces functional. That is design. That is somebody's plan, implemented in stone on a continental scale by people who understood what they were building well enough to build the maintenance access alongside it. Which brings the whole night back around to the question sitting underneath all the others. If the tree is the housing for a machine, and the towers are the terminals for that machine, then who built the machine, and what is it actually for? The Golden Order's answer is the Greater Will. But we have already been underground. We have seen what the Greater Will's presence in this world actually looks like, and it is a nest of enormous pale fingers, twitching in the dark, some of them dying, some of them already dead. Its messengers speak a language nobody can read without a professional interpreter standing beside them. And the last time it sent anything into this world, according to more than one well-informed character, it either missed, or was wrong, or has not been paying attention for a very long time. So the chain of authority runs from a silent god, through a broken interface, to a distributed network of towers, to a machine inside a tree that has sealed its own door. And every institution in this world is still operating on the assumption that somebody is at the other end of it. Chapter 14, The death the tree could never allow. There is a man standing on a bridge in the Altus Plateau who has not moved or spoken in a very long time, and he is doing the most dangerous thing anybody in this world does. Goldmask is a Golden Order fundamentalist, which sounds like it should mean a zealot, and in fact means very nearly the opposite. Fundamentalism here is the belief that the Golden Order is a coherent system of laws that can be studied, tested, and reasoned about in the way you would reason about mathematics, not worshipped, understood. If the order is truly the fundamental principle of the world, then it should be internally consistent, and if you study it carefully enough, you should be able to derive its structure the way you derive a proof. So he stands on a bridge and thinks about it for years without eating or sleeping or answering anyone in a posture of unbroken concentration. And what he eventually concludes is that there is a flaw, not a corruption introduced from outside by an enemy god, not a failure of the faithful to keep their vows, a flaw in the design itself, present from the beginning, built into the structure of the order at the point where it was made. That conclusion is the most subversive statement made by any character in this game, and it is delivered by a man who cannot speak through an intermediary on a bridge to almost nobody. Everything else in this story that opposes the Erdtree opposes it from outside. The fire giants had their own god, Rani had the stars, Mikola built his own tree. The frenzied flame wants to end the concept of order entirely. All of them are, in one sense or another, foreigners to the golden system, arguing with it from a position outside its walls. Goldmask is inside. He accepts the premises. He accepts the authority of the order as a description of reality, and working entirely within it, with total sincerity and enormous patience, he arrives at the conclusion that the thing is broken at the root. That is why his ending exists, and why it is the one that attempts a repair rather than a replacement. Mending the ring with the rune of perfect order is a fundamentalist's answer. Keep the system, fix the proof, remove the inconsistency, and let the corrected law run the world properly for the first time. Whether that would actually help anybody is another question entirely, and one the game leaves you holding. The single most consequential act in the history of this world was a removal. Destined Death, the rune of death, was taken out of the Elden Ring and sealed away, held inside the body of Malekith, who was made the Black Blade and given the task of carrying it for as long as he existed. That one act is what made the Golden Order's central promise possible. With death removed from the fundamental rules of reality, nothing ends properly anymore. Everything cycles, everything returns, the doorway stays open. It is very easy to hear that as a gift, and for a long time it evidently functioned as one. But it is worth naming clearly what actually happened. Somebody reached into the operating rules of the world and deleted one of them permanently for the convenience of a specific religious project, and it did not work cleanly because nothing in this story ever does. The dead do not simply rest peacefully inside the tree. They accumulate in deep-root. They rise in the catacombs, which is why the catacombs need guardians in the first place. They persist as those who live in death, which then requires the order to build an entire apparatus of hunters and inquisitors and violence in order to maintain a promise that was supposed to be a mercy. Think about the shape of that. The Golden Order removed death so that nobody would have to suffer it. The consequence was a population of people who could not die properly, and the Order's response to that population was to hunt them. The mercy created the problem, and then the mercy required the killing. Then a fragment of destined death gets stolen on the night of the Black Knives and driven into Godwyn, and the wound that opens is one the Order has no tool to close, because it removed the tool on purpose generations earlier and gave it to a beast to carry into a floating city that exists outside of time. The tree could not allow death. So death went and happened underneath it anyway, in the roots, to the most beloved son it had, and there was nothing left in the whole apparatus of the Golden Order capable of finishing what had been started. That is what a removed rule costs. Not the absence of the thing you removed, but the total inability to handle it when it comes back. Malekith's role deserves its own room, because he is one of the very few figures in this story whose entire existence is a container for something else. He is a beast, shadow to Marika, and shadows in this world are bound to their gods in a way that is never fully explained, but is clearly not optional. He was given destined death to keep, not to wield freely, not to use as he saw fit, to hold. The rune is inside him. The sword he carries, the black blade, is the mechanism by which the smallest possible quantity of it can be let out into the world under controlled conditions. That is a life sentence dressed up as an honor. He does not get a kingdom. He does not get a great rune of his own. He does not get a place in the family, or a seat at the table, or a name that gets spoken in the histories alongside Godfrey and Radigan. He gets to be a vault with legs, stationed at the very edge of the world, in a city that is permanently in the act of falling, and he takes it seriously. That is the part that lands hardest. When you finally reach him, he is not a corrupted guardian who has forgotten his duty. He is still doing the job, thousands of years later, in a ruin at the end of time, against an intruder who has come specifically to take the thing he was told to keep safe. When you kill him, you are not simply beating a difficult boss and taking a rune. You are releasing destined death back into the world. The game is unusually direct about this. Immediately afterwards, the capital changes. Ash spreads across Leyndell. The sky alters. The possibility of things ending properly re-enters a world that had it surgically removed before recorded history. Read against the tree, the whole arrangement is almost architectural in its logic. The Erdtree holds the ring. The ring holds the rules. The rule that had to be taken out of the ring was put inside a person, and that person was stationed in a city outside the world. Everything this order does with what it cannot accept follows the same instruction, repeated at every scale. Put it somewhere else. Put something loyal in front of it, and do not discuss it again. Chapter 15, Marika, and where the god ends and the tree begins. At some point tonight, we have to address the relationship at the center of all of this, which is the one between the tree and the woman. Marika is the eternal queen, vessel of the greater will, the god of the golden order, and she is bound to the Erdtree, not standing beside it, not living in it, not tending it, bound. When you finally get inside, at the end of everything, what you find is her body held in the tree's own substance, crucified into it, unable to leave. The question of which came first is one the game genuinely will not settle. Did Marika become a god and then take up residence in the tree? Was she placed there? Did the tree grow around her? Is the tree the physical body of the greater will's authority in this world, with Marika as its operator, or is the tree simply an enormous prison with a god in it? What is clear is that by the time you arrive, they are extremely difficult to talk about separately. When the Erdtree seals its door, is that the tree refusing or Marika refusing? When grace withdraws from the tarnished, is that a decision or a symptom? The theology insists on a hierarchy, with the greater will at the top, then Marika as vessel, then the tree as holy medium. The physical evidence suggests something considerably more tangled, and then there is the shattering itself. Marika broke the Elden ring with her own hands, and the entire golden world came apart as a result, and she has never once explained why in terms anyone can produce. The most persuasive readings connect it to Godwin. Her son was killed in a way that could not be undone by a system she had built specifically to make death undoable. She had removed the rule that would have let him finish dying, and because of that removal, he could not. Faced with a son who was neither alive nor able to stop, in a world she had personally arranged so that this exact outcome could not be resolved, she broke the thing that made the arrangement. If that reading is right, then the shattering was not a coup or a betrayal or a bid for power. It was a mother destroying the machine that would not let her child be dead. There is a strong case, assembled from a great many small pieces, that the Erdtree's decline began long before the shattering, and that the events of the game are late symptoms rather than causes. Consider what is already true before Marika ever breaks anything. The Golden Order is already hunting those who live in death, which means the cycle is already failing to hold the dead the way it promised to. The Omen are already being sealed under the capital, which means the tree's own crucible heritage is already producing children that the religion built in its name has decided are unacceptable. Godwin is already dead and already rooted. Nokron has already been buried. The eternal cities are already underground. The Shadow Realm has already been sealed behind a gate that nobody talks about. The fire giants have already been exterminated. Every single one of those is a containment measure. Each one exists because something happened that the Order could not process, and the response, without exception, was concealment or violence or both. By the time you arrive as a Tarnished, the world is running on an enormous accumulated backlog of concealed problems, and the tree at the center of it has closed its own door. That is one of the first substantive things you learn about your own quest. You cannot enter. The way is barred, and the ceiling is described not as somebody locking a gate, but as the tree's own refusal. Put the whole picture together and look at it. A tree that will not open, standing over a capital city, above a dead prince tangled in its own roots. In a world where death has been removed from the rules, and the removal has been visibly failing for generations, with the fundamental laws of reality scattered among its warring children. Guarded by things, it grew itself to keep people away. The fire, when it finally comes, is not what breaks the Erdtree. The fire arrives at the very end of a long illness. What the fire does is force open a door on something that had been quietly failing for a very long time behind it. The barrier itself deserves attention because of what it implies about will. You arrive at the base of the tree, after everything, and you cannot get in. The path is closed by thorns and roots and the tree's own substance grown across the way, not by guards, not by a locked gate that somebody built and somebody else holds the key to. The tree has closed itself. There is a reading in which this is Marika's doing, and a reading in which it is the tree's own, and by this point in the story, it is not at all clear that those are separate parties. But hold on to the plain physical fact, because the plain physical fact is remarkable enough on its own. The center of the world's religion has locked its own door against the very people that religion called back to fix things. The Tarnished were exiled when grace left them. Then grace returned, and they were summoned across the sea and guided by golden threads across an entire continent, through castles and swamps and capitals at enormous cost in lives, toward a destination that will not open when they arrive. Everything after that point in the game is a search for another way in, up through the capital and out the other side, across to the mountaintops, into a forge at the top of the world, and ultimately, inevitably, a fire, because when a thing will not open, burning becomes the remaining option. There is a quiet cruelty in the structure of it that I do not think is accidental. The Golden Order spent an age teaching people that the tree was the source of everything good, the destination of every soul, the answer to death itself. And when the faithful finally arrive at it, in person, having survived what almost nobody survives, the tree does not respond at all, not with judgment, not with a test, not with a voice. It simply does not open, and it offers no reason, and there is nobody left in the world with the authority to ask on your behalf. Chapter 16. A fire that should not be able to burn it. The burning of the Erdtree is the moment this whole night has been walking toward, and it is worth being precise about exactly how strange it is. To get inside, you need the flame of ruin. You carry it down from a forge in the mountaintops of the giants, kindled from the fire giant's ancient fire, and you set it against the tree. This is not an ordinary flame, and that distinction is the entire point. It is specifically the fire that was made to destroy the Erdtree, held by a specific people who the Golden Order went to war against and effectively exterminated for exactly this reason and no other. That fact alone should stop you. The counterweapon to the world's central object existed. It was real, it worked, and it was in the hands of an identifiable enemy. And one of the founding wars of the Golden Age was fought to take it away from them and make sure nobody could ever reach it again. And then, when the fire finally does its work, it does not behave like fire at all. It does not consume the tree the way flame consumes wood. It does not reduce it to ash and leave a clearing. It spreads across the structure as something closer to a wound than a burning. It changes the color of the sky over the entire region. It transforms the capital below into a field of gray ash, with the buildings still standing and the people gone. And it leaves the tree itself standing, structurally present, while fundamentally altering what it is. There is a very good argument that what you are watching is not combustion in any sense we would recognize, but the removal of a seal. The tree would not open. Nothing in the world could make it open. The fire opens it. And what is left afterwards is not a stump or a ruin. It is a way in, and beyond that way in, there is a golden space. And standing in that space is Radigan, hammering at a broken ring, and behind him is something that came from outside this world entirely. The fire did not destroy the Erdtree. The fire got you through the door. Because the fire had to come from somewhere, and where it came from tells you exactly what the Golden Order was actually afraid of. The fire giants were a people with their own god and their own flame, living in the far north of the world, and the Erdtree's order made war on them and destroyed them almost entirely. What survives when you arrive is one giant, enormous and ancient, chained to a task, tending a forge in a landscape of permanent snow. What the histories emphasize is that this war was one of the founding acts of the Golden Age. Godfrey led it. It is one of the campaigns that made his reputation and secured the Order's dominance. And the object of the war, stripped of the ceremony, was the flame. So the sequence runs like this. An order arises. It discovers early that one specific power in the world is capable of destroying the object it is built around, and it eliminates the people who hold that power thoroughly as a matter of priority in one of the first great campaigns of its existence. That is not the behavior of a religion confident in its own eternity. That is the behavior of an institution that knows exactly where its own kill switch is and spends its youth making certain that nobody else can ever get near it. And it did not entirely work, which is the detail that matters most. The forge survived. The flame survived. One giant survived, chained beside it, kept alive rather than killed, which is its own kind of statement about what the Order thought it was doing. A very long time later, a Tarnished walked up that mountain, killed the last of them, took the fire that the giants had died protecting, and carried it down to the tree to use for the precise purpose the giants had always intended it for. There is something almost unbearable about that if you sit with it for a moment. The giants' entire civilization was destroyed to prevent this exact outcome, and the outcome happened anyway, carried out by somebody the Golden Order itself summoned back from exile, guided the whole way by the tree's own lights. There is a second fire in this world, and it belongs beside the first, because the contrast between them is the clearest statement the game ever makes about what the Erdtree actually is. The frenzied flame lives beneath the capital, behind a sealed door, in a chamber you can only enter by stripping yourself bare and submitting to it. It is chaos in the most literal available sense, and its promise is not the reform of the world, but the end of the concept of a world. Everything melted down, everything returned to one undifferentiated thing. No separation, no categories, no order at all. The two fires define the poles of the entire argument. The giant's flame destroys the tree so that the world can continue differently under some other arrangement. The frenzied flame destroys the distinctions between things so that there is nothing left that could be arranged at all. And the frenzied flame's constituency is worth looking at very carefully because the game is doing something deliberate with it. It gathers the people at the absolute bottom, Shabriri, Hieta, the blind and the discarded and the ones nobody counted, the people for whom the Golden Order has not merely failed, but has never at any point offered anything, and for whom no realistic reform would offer anything either. Their conclusion, reached honestly from their own position, is that the problem is not this particular order. The problem is order. That is the strongest available criticism of the tree, and the game does something quietly brave with it. It does not put that argument in the mouth of a villain who can be dismissed. It gives it to the most desperate people in the world and lets them make it in complete earnest, and it makes their reasoning legible. If the golden light has categories, and you fall outside all of them, then every version of the golden light is the same light to you. Mending the ring does not help. Perfect order does not help. An age of stars only moves the gods further away without giving you anything. Melting the world down is a terrible answer. It is also, from where they are standing, the only answer anybody has offered them. Chapter 17: What Actually Lives Inside It. When the fire finally opens the way, the first thing standing inside is not the Elden beast and not Marika. It is Radigan, and what he is doing when you find him is the saddest image in the game. He is hammering. He has the shattered Elden ring in front of him and a hammer in his hand, and he is trying to put it back together, and he has evidently been trying for a very long time, and it has not worked, and it is not going to work. Radigan is Marika's other half. The game states this plainly enough that arguing about it is unproductive, though what exactly it means remains genuinely open. One body, two people, or one person, two aspects, or a god who split herself and could not fully reconcile the halves afterwards. What matters for tonight is what he represents structurally. Marika broke the ring. Radigan, who is Marika, spends the rest of eternity trying to mend it. The same being in the same body, destroying and repairing the same object, permanently, with no possibility of either side winning. That is the Golden Order's whole condition, rendered as a single figure, an institution that cannot stop breaking what it cannot stop trying to fix. And when you fight him, he is not defending the tree in any meaningful sense. He is in the way. He is a body standing between you and what is behind him, and the game's own framing makes this quite clear. You go through him. He is the last human-shaped obstacle before the thing that is not human shaped at all. There is a detail in that fight worth noticing. Radigan's body is cracked and held together with gold, in the same way broken pottery gets repaired with gold in our world. He has been mended, visibly, imperfectly, and the mending shows. The god who is trying to repair the ring is himself a repair job. And behind him, waiting, is the thing that made the ring in the first place, which has no interest in repair at all, and never did. Then Radigan falls, and his body opens, and the Elden beast comes out of it. This is the moment the entire night has been building toward, and it is worth slowing down for, because what you are looking at answers the question in tonight's title more completely than any amount of theology could. The Elden beast is not a plant. It is not a spirit of the woodland or a manifestation of growth or a nature deity of any recognizable kind. It is a vast, star flecked golden creature that swims through space, trailing light, moving through the air as though the air were water. You fight it in a golden field that behaves like a sky, in a space that does not correspond to anywhere in the world you have been walking through for 100 hours. That is what is inside the tree, not sap and heartwood, not a chamber with a relic on a pedestal, not Marika on a throne, though she is there too, held in the substance of it, a creature from outside this world, holding the rules of this world inside its body, which retroactively answers everything we started with. The Erdtree does not obey the physics of trees, because the Erdtree is not a tree that grew out of the ground. It is the outward form of something that was placed here. The bark is a surface, the roots are reach, spread across an entire world to hold the thing steady and draw what it needs. The light is signal. The visibility from every corner of the map is not a rendering trick and not a metaphor. It is what it looks like when something that is present to the whole world at once puts on a shape. The Elden beast is the Elden ring. The game says this directly. The thing that governs the fundamental principles of existence in the lands between is a living creature that was sent here by the greater will, and the tree is what grew around it, or what was grown around it, or what it made to sit inside. Every religion in this world, every war, every murdered child, every buried city, and sealed gate and hunted population has been arranged around the housing of an animal from somewhere else. There is something quietly devastating about the Elden beast once the fight is over and you have time to think about what just happened. It is the emissary of the greater will, the outer god from which the entire Golden Order draws its authority. It carries the world's operating rules in its body. It is functionally the most important object in existence, and it does not speak. It has no argument to make, no theology to offer, no explanation for anything that has happened, no justification for the exclusions or the sewers or the buried cities, no acknowledgement that you have come a very long way to arrive here. It is an animal of enormous power, doing what it was sent to do in a room at the center of a tree that nobody was permitted to enter. Meanwhile, the greater will itself has been effectively absent for a very long time. The two fingers are broken, or misreading their instructions, or receiving nothing at all and continuing to gesture out of habit. The fingers underground are dying in their nests. Several characters, some of them extremely well informed, and none of them fools, arrive independently at the conclusion that whatever was directing this order has stopped paying attention, or has been wrong for a long time, or was never the benevolence it was presented as being. So look at the structure of authority in this world, all the way up, now that you have seen every level of it. At the bottom, people. Above them, an institution with laws and knights and inquisitors. Above that, demigods holding fragments of reality. Above them, a god bound into a tree. Inside the tree, a beast that cannot speak. And above the beast, a will that has gone quiet and may have been wrong from the start. Every institution in this world is still running on the assumption that somebody is home. The evidence, once you have walked all the way in and killed the last thing standing between you and the answer, does not support the assumption. That is the real horror at the center of Elden Ring, and it is not a monster. It is an empty chair at the top of a very long chain of command, and an entire world still saluting it. Chapter 18: The Orders That Came Before. There is one more thing waiting at the end of time, and it reframes everything the Golden Order believes about its own permanence. Placidusax is a dragon, enormously old, with multiple heads and a body that no longer entirely fits in the space it occupies. You find him in Crumbling Farum Azula, in an arena you reach by lying down in a specific spot and letting the world take you somewhere else. and what he is doing there is waiting. He was Elden Lord before Godfrey, before Radigan, before the Erdtree, before the Golden Order, before any of the names anybody in the lands between would recognize. He ruled in the Age of Dragons, and he served a god, and that god is gone. Not defeated, gone. Departed or vanished or withdrawn to somewhere the story does not name. And Placidus Sax has stayed exactly where he was left, in a city outside of time, waiting for a god who is not coming back, for a span of years that the game does not attempt to quantify. Set that beside everything we have looked at tonight, and the pattern becomes almost unbearable. There was an order before this one. It had a lord, and a god, and a center, and it was presumably as total and as inevitable to the people living under it as the Golden Order is to the people living under that. And it ended. Its god left. Its lord is still standing in the ruins, with nothing to serve. The Erdtree is not the first thing to sit at the center of this world. It is the current occupant. Somewhere underneath it are the buried cities of the Order before, and floating above it is the ruined capital of the Order before that. And in that capital is a dragon still holding a post that stopped meaning anything an age ago. Which raises the possibility that the Golden Order's real error was never cruelty or exclusion or the sealing of death. It was the belief that it was permanent. Every institution in this world that thought it was the final arrangement is now underground or in the sky or waiting in a room outside of time for somebody who left. Back through the gate in the land of shadow, there is a detail that explains the entire Golden Order in one object, and it is a jar. The Hornsent kept them, enormous ceramic vessels, and inside them, people, living ones, packed in, fused together, their bodies combined into something the Hornsent regarded as holy. The practice was called sanctification, and the intention behind it was to produce a saint, or a god, or something on the way to one. That is what the Land of Shadow was doing before Marika, and Marika came from there. What happened next is the founding crime the Golden Order sealed behind a gate. Marika, having risen, turned on the Hornsent and destroyed them. Their civilization was broken, their people were impaled on their own towers, and their entire religious apparatus was ended with a level of violence that the game shows you rather than describes. And there is a strong reading in which she had cause. The jars were an atrocity, whatever her personal history with them was, and the game gestures at something specific and terrible. The practice itself is one of the most genuinely horrifying things in this world. But look at what she built afterwards. An order that sorts people into acceptable and unacceptable forms, that seals the ones with horns beneath its capital, that collects the dead into a single vessel at the center of the world and holds them there, together, forever, in a substance that preserves. The Golden Order's promise is a jar. It is a very much better jar, offered voluntarily, with light and ceremony, and the genuine comfort of knowing your dead are somewhere. But the shape of the idea, everything gathered into one container and kept, is the same shape she destroyed a civilization for practicing. That is the thing the Shadow Realm was sealed to hide. Not just a massacre, a resemblance. Step back now and look at the whole map at once, because by this point in the night, the pattern is impossible to miss. Nokron and Noxtella, buried underground. The fire giants, exterminated to the last, with one kept chained beside the forge. The Hornsent and their entire realm, sealed behind a gate and struck from the histories. The Omen walled into a sewer beneath the capital they were born to rule. Those who live in death, hunted across the world by a dedicated apparatus. The Crucible, reclassified from origin to deformity. The dragons, reduced from rulers of everything to a small cult of survivors trading their own scales for scraps of power. Every single older thing in this world has been buried, sealed, hunted, or renamed as an obscenity. That is the Erdtree's actual history, told through geography rather than through scripture, not the natural center of a world that grew up around it in harmony. The winner of a very long series of conflicts, standing on top of everything it beat, with the losers still down there in remarkably good condition. And this is precisely why the underground of this game is so much richer and stranger than it needs to be. The map is not built with an enormous lower level because caves are enjoyable to explore. It is built that way because the story is fundamentally about what a golden surface is standing on. Every time you take a lift down in this game, you are going back in time. Limgrave gives you Siofra and the ancestral followers, older than the gold. Below that, Nokron and Noxtella and the age of the moon. Below that, the lake of rot and the roots drinking from it. And underneath the capital itself, Deeproot and a prince in the roots, and the sewers with the omen in them. The vertical axis of this world is a timeline. The deeper you go, the older the thing you find, and the more thoroughly the surface has arranged not to think about it. The Erdtree is at the top of that stack. It has the best view and the most light and the largest congregation, and it is standing on every single thing it replaced. Chapter 19, What the Endings Do to It. It is worth asking quite late in the night why any of this took the form it took. The Greater Will sent a beast carrying the rules of reality. That beast ended up housed inside an enormous golden tree, visible from everywhere, unreachable by anyone, with roots running under the entire world. But nothing about a set of governing principles requires a tree. It could have been a mountain, a throne, a city, a star, a voice in the sky. There is a practical answer and there is a thematic one, and they point in the same direction. The practical answer is that a tree is the most efficient possible shape for what this system actually does. It needs to reach everywhere, invisibly, underground, and draw something up out of every region. That is a root network. It needs a single visible center that the whole population can orient toward without instruction. That is a trunk and a crown. It needs to reproduce itself locally so that collection can happen at a regional scale without everything traveling to the capital. That is seeds and minor Erdtrees and burial grounds around each one. If you were designing a machine to gather the dead of an entire continent into one place and to be worshipped while doing it, you would arrive at something extremely close to the shape of a tree. The thematic answer is that a tree is the single most trustworthy shape available. Nobody is frightened of a tree. Trees are what shelter looks like, and patience, and cycles, and the reassuring idea that things grow back. A tree at the center of a religion reads instantly as natural, as belonging, as having always been there, which makes it perfect cover for an object that is none of those things. The Erdtree is not natural. It did not grow up out of this world. It came from outside. It does not obey the world's physics, and the thing inside it is an animal from somewhere else entirely. The most alien object in this world put on the most familiar shape in existence, and an entire civilization spent an age worshipping the disguise, which leaves the only question this long night has been walking toward from the beginning. Knowing all of that, standing inside it, with the fire still going out around you, what can actually be done about a thing like this? The endings are usually discussed as choices about the world. They are equally, and perhaps more usefully, choices about the tree. Mend the ring as it was, and the system continues exactly as it was, restored, with every one of its exclusions intact. The omen are still omen. Those who live in death are still hunted. The sewers stay full. The machine runs on, repaired, and everything that was wrong with it before is still wrong with it now, with a new Elden Lord standing at the front to make it look like something changed. Mend it with one of the variant runes, and you adjust the emphasis without touching the architecture. Perfect order gives you the fundamentalist's corrected proof, law without the inconsistency, which may be an improvement and may simply be a tidier version of the same exclusions. The rune of the Death Prince gives Godwin's condition to the whole world, which is either justice or catastrophe, depending entirely on where you were standing when it happens. Take the Age of Stars, and the whole apparatus is removed to a distance. This is the ending people reach for when they want out, and it is worth being precise about what it does. Ranni does not destroy the tree. She does not free the omen or empty the sewers, or resolve anything about the world's cruelty. She takes gods and their certainties away from arm's reach, so that the world has to work out its own business without a golden light telling it what belongs. Take the frenzied flame, and there is no system, no tree, no distinctions, and nothing left that could be arranged into an order at all. What none of the endings offer is the thing most people actually want after a long night of looking at this. Keep the mercy, remove the cruelty, let the dead rest, and the living alone. That option is not on the table, and its absence is the most pointed thing this game says about the Erdtree. You can restore it, adjust it, take it away, or annihilate everything. You cannot reform it. Ranni's ending deserves its own moment, because it is the one that engages most seriously with everything we have found tonight. She is the only major figure in this story who correctly diagnoses the actual problem. Not that the Golden Order is corrupt, though it is. Not that its current management is failing, though it is. Her objection is structural, and she states it clearly. She wants a world where the gods are distant, where certainty is not enforced from a single point, and where the fundamental principles of life are not held in one object at the center of everything, with a queue of people fighting over who gets to hold it. That is a direct response to the machine, not a rebellion against this particular god, an argument against the arrangement of having one, and it required her to do something that mirrors, uncomfortably, the thing the Golden Order did to itself. Ranni killed her own body to escape the fate the Two Fingers had assigned her. She used a fragment of destined death, stolen on the night of the Black Knives, on herself. Godwin got the other half of that same operation. The two of them are the same event seen from opposite ends. His soul died, and his body lived. Her body died, and her soul continued. One murder, one theft of the world's forbidden rule, split between the beloved son and the daughter who wanted out. So when Ranni takes the world into the Age of Stars, she is not arriving from outside with clean hands. She is a participant in the founding wound of the entire story, and the freedom she offers was purchased with the same stolen fragment that left a prince rooted in the dark for an age. That does not make her wrong. Her analysis is the sharpest in the game, but it does mean that the only ending which genuinely addresses the structure of the problem was made possible by the single act that broke the world in the first place. There is a chair at the end of all this, and it is worth looking at before we finish. The Elden throne sits inside the tree, and becoming Elden Lord means sitting in it beside a mended ring. That is the goal every tarnished was called back for. It is the destination the golden threads have been pointing at since the first sight of grace you ever touched. And here's what is strange about it. The Elden Lord is a consort. That is the actual position. Godfrey held it. Radagon held it. The Lord is not the god and does not rule in his own right. He stands beside the ring, enforcing an order he did not write, in the name of a will that is not his. Godfrey was exiled the moment his usefulness ended. Radagon was absorbed into the god he married, and spends eternity hammering at something that will not mend. Neither of them, in the end, had any authority over the arrangement they served. They were instruments with very good armor. So the prize at the end of this 100-hour journey, the thing the whole world has been fighting a civil war over for an age, is the right to stand next to the machine and keep it running. Every demigod tore the world apart for a fragment of it. Every tarnished crossed a sea for the chance at it. And what it actually confers is the position of the two men in this story who were used most completely and discarded most thoroughly, which is why Rani's offer lands the way it does. She is the only one who looks at the throne clearly and declines to sit in it. Her ending takes the whole arrangement, the ring and the tree and the gods and the certainty, and moves it out past the edge of the world so that nobody has to be the consort of a machine ever again. The throne is not power. It is the most prestigious job the Erdtree has ever offered, and everyone who has ever held it ended up either exiled or fused into the thing they served. Chapter 20: The Tree Nobody Has Actually Seen. And yet the ending most people see leaves something standing. After the fire, after Radigan, after the beast, the world is not empty. There is ash across the capital. There is a changed sky. There is a great deal of wreckage and a very large number of dead. But the roots are still under everything, because the roots were always under everything, and they still run through cities that were buried before the gold arrived, and through a lake of rot at the bottom of the world. Whether anything golden grows back is left genuinely open, and the openness feels deliberate rather than evasive. This story has been extremely consistent on one point from the beginning. Things in this world do not finish. Death was removed and had to be reintroduced. A prince died and could not stop dying. A tree was sealed and had to be burned open. A god broke a ring and then spent eternity trying to mend it. An order replaced another order, which had replaced another order, and the previous tenants are all still here, underground and in the sky, in surprisingly good condition. Every ending in this game is a state change rather than a conclusion. Even the frenzied flame, which promises to end everything, is described in terms of melting things down into one, which is a transformation rather than an absence, which is in the end the most genuinely tree-like thing about the Erdtree. Not the bark or the branches or the light, the persistence, the way a root system outlives whatever was standing above it and stays in the soil and waits and does not particularly care what gets built on top of it next. You burn the tree, the roots remain. That is what roots are for. It would be unfair to spend an entire night on this and not put the other side of it properly. So let us do that now while the fire is still going out. For an enormous number of people in this world, over an extraordinarily long period, the Golden Order worked. That is not a small thing, and it should not be waved away just because we have spent several hours looking at the sewers. Death was not the end. Your dead came back into the cycle. There was a light on the horizon from anywhere you happened to be standing, and a small golden light at the roadside when you were tired and needed to stop, and a genuine actionable answer to the oldest and worst question any person has ever had to sit with in the dark. Lindell is magnificent. It is one of the most beautiful things anyone has built in this medium, and the people who built it were not fools or monsters. The Erdtree itself is genuinely overwhelmingly beautiful, and the first time you crest a hill in Limgrave and see it, the feeling you get is not sinister. It is awe, and it is earned. Godwyn was loved, and the grief for him is real grief. The fact that his father's people were still fighting for the Golden Line thousands of years later is not only propaganda and habit. Something in it was worth that. The horror in this story is not that the Erdtree is a lie. If it were a lie, this would be a much simpler and much less interesting night. The horror is that the Erdtree is largely true and still requires an underground. The cycle is real. The mercy is real. the light is real. And the price of all of it is a sealed sewer, a buried city, a hunted population, and a prince rooted in the dark beneath the throne room, growing. Both of those things are the same institution. That is a harder and better story than a deception would have been, and it is why people are still arguing about this tree years after the game came out. So, what is it? When you put every piece of it together on the table at once, it is a housing. Inside, it is a creature that came from outside this world, carrying the rules that make the world work in the shape it works in. That creature was sent by something that has since gone quiet. It is a collection system. Its roots run under every region in the world, drawing the dead up out of the ground and into itself, held in a substance that preserves and does not release. Its seeds put smaller collection points across a continent, each one surrounded by graves, each one guarded. It is an authority. Its light is distributed by category rather than by distance, reaching the accepted and withdrawing from the discarded, and the categories were decided by an institution that placed itself between the tree and everybody else, and has been interpreting ever since. It is a container for a god who is bound into it, who broke the rules it holds and cannot stop trying to repair them. And it is a disguise in the shape of the most reassuring object our species has ever looked at, standing over the buried remains of every order that came before it. The Golden Order will tell you it is the source of life. It is more accurate to say it is the terminus of death, and that the two have been deliberately conflated for an age by people who benefited enormously from the confusion. None of that means the comfort it provided was fake. People slept better because that light was on the horizon. Whole generations lived and died believing they would be gathered up and kept, and by the internal rules of this world, they were right. It is simply that nobody who took comfort in it ever went down and looked at the roots. So we come back around to where the night started with the simplest observation of all of them. Nobody in this world has ever actually seen the Erdtree. They have all seen it constantly. That is the strange part. It has been present at every moment of every life in the lands between, gold on the horizon from every fields and every road and every window, from birth to death, without interruption. There has never been a day when it was not there, and not one of them has stood at a distance where they could take in its actual shape. Not one of them has walked up and put a hand on the bark. Not one has gone down to see what the roots are resting in, or what is being drawn up through them, or who is tangled in them at the bottom. The people of Landell live at its foot and see a wall. The people of Caelid see a light above a ruin that the light did nothing to prevent. The tarnished see a destination that will not open. The demigods held pieces of what was inside it and used them to tear each other apart without ever once discussing what they were actually holding. And the only ones who have been anywhere near the truth of it are the dead in deep-root depths, tangled in the roots, in a place the living are not supposed to visit and reach only by falling. That is what tonight's question was pointing at. It is not that the Erdtree is inconsistent or badly designed or a mistake somebody made. It is that it does not make sense as a tree, and it was never really being presented as one. It is a thing from outside the world, holding the rules of the world, wrapped in golden bark, visible to everyone and reachable by no one, with a beautiful promise on the surface and underneath it in the dark, running under every region and every buried city and every quiet grave, the parts that were actually doing the work. And the whole world was built facing it. Sleep well. If you drifted off somewhere down in the roots tonight, nothing was lost down there that will not still be waiting the next time you go looking for it. Good night.